have some data here in terms of the leadership of Dallas, and I must say I was not aware that you produce so much electricity from renewable sources, that you save, of course, 4 million tons of carbon emissions per year. From one headline that I'm reading here, another one says that over 60% of the city's municipal fleet of non-emergency vehicles use alternative fuels. 60% of the city's municipal fleet, that's a fantastic number. You constructed 32 LEED Silver or higher municipal buildings since 2003. That's outstanding. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, you guys are really, leaders in this space, aren't you?
We are. We're kind of quiet leaders in this red state of Texas. We're very proud of that work, right?
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into the event, the EarthX panel. Jim, you participated in the panel. Theresa, you did not. You were unable to make it. But Jim, if you can give us just briefly, what was your message? What was the main takeaway that you wanted folks to hear from you at the event? The description of the panel that you participated in focuses on whole systems thinking or whole systems approach, coordinated strategies to manage resilience, climate resilience, and both in the preparation as well as the recovery and the process post an event. So what was your contribution or your main message, and
Sure.
what do you think?
Well, I guess first from the mile high view, I started working in my current position in the Office of Environmental Quality at the City of Dallas about 1.5 years ago. And at that point, Theresa, who's our Chief Resilience Officer, was in the midst of resilience planning and asked if I could help with respect to doing resilience and the impact on infrastructure and the extent that we were going to consider climate change impacts and mitigation in our resilience planning. So I've been engaged in her process for about 1.5 years too as well then. And the panel really focused on climate resilient cities. So it paired two things that are sort of near and dear. That's resilience and what cities are doing with respect to planning for risks associated with climate change. Here in North Texas, we've been talking about climate risks with respect to our urban heat island effect, our loss of tree canopy, and lots of surfaces that are impermeable. We've been dealing with this issue for multiple years, and we really just started talking about how those risks are going to be enhanced with the changes associated with heating and climate change probably in the last 6 to 12 months. City of Dallas hosted a climate change symposium in March of this past year where we talked about the risks to North Texas. We've been embedding those risks as we're talking about resilience. So it was really a perfectly right time to talk about that. And really what I let the audience know is that, right now we're sort of in a little bit of a period of flux where all of a sudden we're talking about climate change and considering climate change when we really hadn't in the past, at least in a way that was direct. You noted yourself about our commitment to renewable energy, our commitment to a fleet that has non-traditional fuel sources, and all of that wraps into improving our air quality in North Texas. That's important because the things that we're going to do to improve our air quality in North Texas are also climate change mitigators. So we've got a head start with respect to what we're doing with resilience and climate change because we've already been doing it for so many years to improve our North Texas air quality. So that was a large part of the message was, look, we've already got some things going on here in North Texas that folks maybe wouldn't anticipate that are assisting us with our climate change response. I also identified a couple of the projects that we're working on in addition to the ones that you already mentioned. One that I brought up was our Dallas Water Gardens project. And that is a potential public-private partnership between the city and a private party that would include a series of ponds along our Trinity River that flows through downtown Dallas. And it would sort of bring the public together with nature, but also provide that flooding risk mitigation, water quality benefits. And it's really a wonderful example of a piece of green infrastructure that benefits the public, and it's also reproducible because it's part of a public-private partnership, and the city is just not left holding the bag, having to fund this huge thing. So I think people were really gratified to hear that those sorts of things are happening here in Dallas, and that was really the tone and tenor of what I had to say.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. It sounds like an awesome discussion that you had there. Theresa, your role as CRO, as Chief Resilience Officer of the city. Now that, if you can give us a little bit of background on that, it is part of the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities Initiative. But before that, you were in planning, you've been in the city for a while in a related role having to do with all of this. So give us a little bit of your journey and what led up to that CRO position, and then a bit of an overview of your agenda, what's on your plate across the board of issues, from urbanism to food security and transportation and public health, and so some of the items that Jim just talked about, but from your perspective, where you sit.
So thanks for the question. That's a great question. I've been with the city for 15 years now. The great majority of that was spent as the planning and development director. And in that role, I oversaw zoning, building inspections, engineering, real estate, permitting, that kind of thing. And as we were saying kind of in our introduction, Dallas has been this quiet leader in sustainability. Dallas was the first major city in the United States to mandate green building codes. And I think we did that in 2005 or 2006. Do you remember? Exactly?
It was before I came to the city, but it was around that time frame.
And at the time, Chicago and New York were touting green building codes, but they were all voluntary. And we had an extraordinary mayor at the time. His name was Tom Leppert, and he had actually retired as the CEO and president of Turner Construction, which happened to be the largest construction company in the world. And so he was our mayor, and he was a fierce advocate of green building codes and sustainability and the environment. And so with his leadership, we were able to pass the first mandatory green building ordinances in the United States. The city, all of our facilities, everything we build, we had a big building program with our 2006 bond program. All of our buildings now are at least silver LEED certified, and we've continued to push the threshold up. So we have a number of gold buildings, and we've even had a number of significant energy audits. We had outside auditors come in and look at our buildings and see how we can reduce our carbon footprint. So Dallas continues to be a leader, and I got to be a big part of that, running the building permitting and construction department. So we're very proud of that.
On that note, if I may just interrupt you briefly, we can come back to buildings, but buildings has been a very important part, of course, it is a very important part of resilience. And depending on the weather impacts or the extreme weather impacts that hit a particular area. So from that perspective, on your lead focus, on your buildings focus, how do you see the connection to resilience of or resilience in the face of the extreme weather events that you face in North Texas? How does that contribute to the resilience?
Well, that was one of the projects that James and I got to partner on. Through our 100 Resilient City program, we got the resources and expertise of AGU came in and helped us look at the sustainable and resilient impacts to the built environment. We found that our biggest kind of climate risks, if you will, are of course flooding and hailstorms. Hailstorms are a significant event in Dallas. Dallas being a low regulatory environment, we currently don't have, we have very minimal regulations about roofing and building standards. And so this gave us an opportunity to look at how we can change the regulatory framework in terms of high winds and hailstorms and roofing materials to make sure that we are building buildings that are sustainable, that will last through those events. Especially, our main concern was low-income folks. As you know, a lot of low-income people in Dallas own their own homes, but they don't have the resources to keep those homes insured or maintain them if something happens. And as you well know, if you have a major hail event and you have your roof is damaged, it could lead to a very quick overall deterioration of the entire structure. So we wanted to explore that opportunity and look at ways that he could ensure that our most vulnerable populations, especially our older minority populations, didn't increase. We could maybe look for ways to reduce that risk just by changing our building codes and our standards. The other thing that we really were very we placed a high priority on was understanding our critical facilities and whether those were at risk of flooding. So one of the things that AGU helped us do was look at all our hospitals in Dallas and analyze whether they were at risk for flooding if we had a major inundation or flood. And so we've looked at that analysis. It looks like, for the most part, those structures are secure. We do have one hospital that's in a low-lying area. We have a major drainage project now, Mill Creek, Peaks Branch Mill Creek, which is about a $230 million drainage and infrastructure upgrade that's under construction right now, I think. And that is that was our most significant flood risk in terms of critical facilities. So we've been able to do a lot of great work here. The other thing that Dallas is really, really fortunate to have is a very generous philanthropic community that has puts a very high premium on environmental quality. And we have had data and science gaps at the city in terms of understanding urban heat island, understanding our loss of tree canopy, and our philanthropic sector has stepped in and funded studies and analysis and brought those to the city for us to be able to factor into our policy development and our regulations. And so we're very grateful to have that type of participation with these environmental advocates and these environmental stewards of our city. So Dallas is really fortunate to have that.
And wonderful. You would ask particularly about lead structures too, and Theresa covered that in pretty good depth. And I think, it really underscores what Dallas's approach is to issues like these. I mean, when we were considering whether or not to use LEED standards on our new construction, the city studied the cost of ownership over the period of life of those structures to understand whether there was a financial case to be made, and found out that there was. So in addition to, of course, reduced emissions, energy efficiency, all of those sorts of benefits you gain from LEED structures, the city at the end of the day is saving money by doing that as well. So it was a really powerful argument that is still accepted to this day, thankfully. So
right.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, again, coming back to the panel, to the EarthX panel and the whole systems approach, the coordinated strategy. How is that working out for you there? I mean, just starting with the two of you, right? I mean, so we have the head of environmental quality and the CRO working very seamlessly together from all indications on the entire agenda. But beyond the two of you, in terms of other stakeholders, other players that you work with, that you have in the team, I guess if we can call it, how do you approach whole systems or coordination with a broader pool of people who have to do with climate resilience or making sure that Dallas and more broadly North Texas is ready for whatever the climate throws at you?
Well, I think Dallas has, again, a lot of quiet leadership in this. Not only do James and I work very closely together, we work with our Public Works Department. I've actually taken the director of our Public Works Department, who's also in charge of our bond program, and our Chief Financial Officer. We have taken them to a week-long resilience training that 100RC provided so that they could understand the co-benefits of resilience planning and infrastructure and financing and these public-private partnerships. So that was a tremendous boon. And then, but I think the really unique and almost entrepreneurial way of Dallas is looking at this is actively engaging the nonprofit and philanthropic sector. We rely on them as critical partners in developing the science, developing the data, the methodology, bringing those analysis to the city, and allowing that to inform our policy making process and our decision-making process. And I think Dallas is somewhat unique in that, especially for a city that's in a red state. The city itself is much more liberal than the state itself, but because we work in this conservative environment, we have to take a more entrepreneurial approach. Or else our legislature kind of springs back at us a little bit. We've seen that happen in the past. So I think this engagement of the private sector, the public, the nonprofit sector, and the philanthropic sector is really kind of a triple win for the city of Dallas and insulates us from some of the other barriers that we might all otherwise have.
Yeah, and you know, with respect to climate change particularly, you know, as I mentioned, it's really just been a focus here maybe the last 6 to 12 months to engage stakeholders in the process. You know, we're not just conducting studies here at City Hall about LEED buildings. It's now getting folks that are out in the community that are, you know, leaders in the business industry or community leaders. We had, for example, the Texas State climatologist is speaking at our Climate Change Symposium in March, and really getting everyone together to have that conversation collectively as a community of business leaders, scientists, and just people that care about what we're doing. And to me, that's had tremendous impact. I have people that contact me fairly regularly now to talk about climate change in Dallas, and that just didn't happen 18 months ago. I can tell you that right now. So I think we're making a tremendous progress, and a lot of that is due to us being able to start planning and looking forward in the resilience process that Theresa started here at the city.
Now, in your case, Jim, I'm curious, environmental quality, at least historically, traditionally, has focused on air quality, which you mentioned earlier, and water quality, pretty much implementing and making sure that the city is compliant with a set of laws. And so tell us a little bit about how that role has kind of morphed into this, because you know, your participation, your leadership in climate change mitigation and resilience now from a more of a compliance-focused office. It's interesting from what other cities can learn from your example in terms of how to structure and who to assign this to. And so how did that kind of emerge, your role? How did it evolve into a climate change, or at least including climate change as part of the mix of what you do in your office?
What you described as the traditional compliance role is really what we do. That's the vast bulk of it. I don't have anybody on staff, and my role does not specifically say climate change is one of my duties. So there's basically a bunch of people that care in my department that spend significant amounts of time that would do it on their own if they weren't doing it here at the office. So I want to say it's been a little bit of an organic process, and it's also been a reflection of sort of the values of folks here at City Hall finally coming together again under the umbrella of resilience. And also, you know, when a resilience plan comes out, there's going to be work to do with respect to how we're reacting to climate change, what we're going to be doing with respect to a broader environmental sustainability, climate action type plan. So we're really in the process of getting to what you described, Alex, where there are more defined roles about who's doing what with respect to climate change. So if you have a city in mind that's doing it really well, I'd appreciate you giving me that information so I can take a look.
Well, actually, I think most cities, and Theresa, perhaps in your interaction with the other 99 resilient cities of the Rockefeller program, you may have more insights on that than even we do. But from my observation has been that it is still experimental. It still is very much, I wouldn't say ad hoc, as much as kind of cities trying to figure out what works for each of them, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all program. And you know, obviously the 100 RCs program has taken the lead in kind of organizing this agenda, this methodology of how to approach resilience. But when the rubber hits the road in each particular city, it's assigned to different folks, and it's kind of like, who, you know, the CRO, for example, who he or she brings into the circle kind of depends on local dynamics. And so, but the role of environmental quality, I find kind of innovative in your case. You know, given the traditional role of environmental quality offices and staffs.
And Alex, let me just say that I think James is being a little humble, a little modest here. He's doing some really innovative leadership in this space. One of the challenges in a climate like Texas is you have to kind of take these theoretical, conceptual ideas and make them and bring them down to the ground so that people can really understand. It's hard to grasp in concept. But
I did want to ask also about some of the climate sciences coming out, pointing to a sooner time scale in terms of more catastrophic climate impacts coming up in the not so distant future. So in your case, for example, you mentioned some of the climate concerns that you face, urban heat, hail, drought is something that has become a lot more common in your area than ever before. And so as you look ahead, you know, 20, 30 years down the line, which from a planning perspective is pretty much a reasonable, you know, time frame, right? When you plan a city, when you plan anything in a city, you know, you really do have to look ahead 20, 30, 40 years and beyond. And so from a resilience perspective, how much thinking, how much of the science of the data that you're seeing there in North Texas extends that far into the future to allow you to develop policies and programs today to prepare you for what is likely to happen, the longer droughts, the more frequent droughts, the more frequent urban heat events that could be quite catastrophic as temperatures continue to rise. And so tell us a little bit about that from both of your perspectives as you look ahead and what is going on in Dallas and North Texas on that front.
So we do have really good science from our state climatologist, as James was saying, and we keep abreast of that as it develops. Our two big concerns are, of course, drought and stormwater management, because we do, you know, these droughts are always followed by periods of great inundation. And we used to have a 100-year storm every 100 years. Now we have a 100-year storm every 5 years.
Right, exactly.
And how to manage that stormwater in an urbanizing city, right? So as James was saying, we have increased impervious cover. We're a very low regulatory environment. We haven't mandated the types of green infrastructure and open space. We've made some headways in educating our development community about the benefits of daylighting creeks and managing stormwater in something other than a concrete pipe. But we haven't actually gotten those regulations passed yet. That, I think, is our next big hurdle, is the stormwater management and how we make sure that when these frequent inundations do come, that we're prepared to handle that water, and that, as you said, our marginalized communities aren't impacted. Of course, it's the vulnerable communities that are living in those floodplains, right? And they're the ones that are most impacted. I think we've done a lot of great work with our Trinity River, but there's still much more work to be done. And further analysis of those floodplains and how those lines change as these inundations become more frequent is our next major hurdle.
Yeah, and there's a lot of data out there too, because as the Trinity passes through downtown Dallas, it's a federally regulated floodway. The Army Corps of Engineers is involved, as well as, of course, us here at the City of Dallas. So it's studied pretty heavily, but from a perspective of climate change, I think there's less information maybe than there will be in the future. If we're talking about water supply, that's a different story, I think, because Dallas, I don't know if fortunate is the right word, but Dallas has been in a position for many decades where we have drought and inundation cycles. So for 60 or 70 years, our city leaders have planned for long periods of extended drought because that's what happened in the past. So as climate change exacerbates those conditions, we've already been planning for it for 60 or 70 years, not because of climate change, but just because that's how the water cycle in Texas operates. Over the last 5 or 10 years, the Dallas Water Utilities, which is another department of the City of Dallas, has looked specifically at how climate change might impact our water supply from the perspective of rising heat, increasing evaporation from our surface water impoundments, our reservoirs. So it's specifically been considered in our long-range water supply plan. So we projected out decades, I think up to 40 years from now, with respect to climate change, to ensure that we have adequate water supplies. And that's really, kudos to Dallas Water Utilities for doing that. I don't think that Theresa or I played any role at all in that. We're just happy to have partners like that here at the city.
Again, it's whole systems, right? It's a coordinated approach, right? So there you go.
Yeah, and I think the other opportunity for Dallas is a regional leadership position. The Trinity River, as James mentioned, encircles our downtown, but we're not in control of what happens upstream. And we have a rapidly urbanizing area upstream, which is going to increase those flows into the Trinity River. And if we had a levee breach, it would flood all of downtown Dallas, which is the major employment hub for the entire north central Texas region, and billions of dollars in assets. So we really have to take a regional approach, work with our cities, our smaller suburban cities to the north, and make sure that they're managing their stormwater in such a way that those problems don't flow downstream to us.
Yeah, interdependencies and cascading effects have also become part of the resilience equation, and a lot of cities are increasingly, saying that very thing that you just said, Theresa, in terms of working in a coordinated, collaborative approach with surrounding communities and cities and towns, and because we all depend on one another, so it's indispensable to do that. How about food? I want to close with that. Just to see what kind of thinking, what you guys are doing in terms of food security and the possibilities. Speaking of upstream and cascading effects, as our farmers become more exposed to these extreme catastrophic events
we were in a long drought that we thought would be our drought of record, but it finally ended in 2016. And the state really is pretty heavily dependent on cattle and ranching. And that really impacted Texas farmers and ranchers because there just wasn't water to supply to their cattle. And we saw a lot of tragic kind of events with cattle just dying in the field because there was no water supply. And of course, the Texas Valley produces millions and millions and millions of pounds of produce that is supplied to the nation every year. And so that is a growing concern because Texas it's not the food basket that California is, but we do supply quite a bit of agriculture. So that's been a concern, but not one that the city has taken on. We're primarily urban city.
Yeah.
Our biggest concern is food deserts.
Right.
We have these large expanses of neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. And of course, those neighborhoods are in market failure. They're food deserts, they're healthcare deserts, they're all kinds of amenity and service deserts. And so our big concern, when you have market failure in a neighborhood, when the private sector, when a standard national flag grocery store doesn't see the returns to build in that neighborhood, what's the city's role? How do we close that gap? How do we look for innovative approaches to make sure that people in those neighborhoods can access good, healthy food?
It's really been more of a, I don't want to say I don't think climate change is really a driver there. It's an equity and poverty issue that climate change might exacerbate, but it's one that the city's been looking at. And I think what's emblematic of what's going on there is that we had a huge discussion about food deserts in Dallas. It was probably a year or two ago. And one of the potential solutions that was put out there was let's dangle some economic dollars out there to see if we can get a grocery store located in one of our food deserts. And they offered $3 million for one of these large grocery store chains to relocate in South Dallas, and nobody took them up on the offer.
No takers. $3 million incentive, no takers. So it really has to be an innovative approach. The city of Austin is very concerned with this, the city of Houston and Dallas. And so hopefully between the major urban cities in Texas, we'll come up with some strategies and some pilot projects that we can start to address this very dire concern. Again, it's not climate change, but it's a social and economic equity issue that's that the city must address, and all of the big cities really must address it. Just for the health and the resilience of our families.
It's one of those issues that crosses, where climate change crosses issues that have been dealt with for a long time, even before climate change became such a big concern. And so, I mean, I think the exacerbating possibilities here is really where the focus is, where it crosses with climate change. In other words, to the extent that current and particularly future extreme weather events and these extended droughts and some of these other weather patterns hit you a lot more severely in the future, then those food deserts become a climate change issue. And so to the extent that you deal with them now from an equity perspective and kind of put in place a solution, but also have it as a climate solution for down the line when it is exacerbated by climate impacts, then you'll be doing both at the same time. So it does become a resilience step, even though primarily today it's more of an equity policy concern and humanitarian concern, and so it has to be addressed one way or the other for one reason or the other. So it's good.
Right.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for the time. It's been educational, and congratulations on everything you're doing in Dallas and North Texas. It's a case study. It's a fantastic example for the rest of the country and the rest of the world, how a low regulation, kind of conservative community can become such a leader in sustainability and resilience and climate change more broadly. So kudos to you and to the entire team, and let's stay in touch so we can keep informing people on how you do what you do.
Good, that's great.
Take care.
Bye.
Appreciate you.
Take care.